This might be my last upload. Please view carefully. This might be my last upload. Please view carefully. What you're about to hear isn't speculation. It's pattern recognition. 3 days ago, an analysis went live. Within hours, something unusual began. Not random, coordinated. The comment section flooded, not with viewers, with something else. Accounts defending institutions that were criticized. Narratives being redirected. Conversations being buried. This has happened before. To others who asked the wrong questions. About the wrong institutions. Some channels disappeared overnight. No explanation. No warning. Just gone. If you've ever trusted this analysis, if you've ever used this information to protect your decisions, and what follows in the next few minutes, maybe the most important economic warning you hear this year, because the patterns documented here reveal something far larger than one channel's survival. They reveal who controls what you're allowed to know, and why that should concern every serious decision maker watching this. Stay with me all the way through. Welcome to Metal and Macro. If you've found value in this analysis over time, if you've quietly used these insights to sharpen your own economic judgment, then perhaps consider subscribing. Not like clicking a button on a screen you'll forget in an hour, but the way you'd bookmark a reference you might actually need again. The way someone with experience saves reliable sources, thoughtfully. Because if these patterns continue, subscriptions may be the only way you'll know when the next analysis goes live. Before we proceed, a question worth asking. Where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments below. Not for analytics, but because what's being documented here is happening globally, and understanding the geographic spread of awareness matters more than you might think. Now, let's examine what's actually happening, and why it should concern anyone making serious economic decisions. There is a pattern emerging across digital platforms, and most people are not seeing it yet. Over the past 18 months, independent financial analysts have been disappearing from public view, not all at once, but steadily, quietly. One channel goes silent, then another, then 3 more within the same month. At first, it looks random. Technical violations, they say. Community guideline issues, algorithmic adjustments, platform policy updates. But when someone looks closer, when they track the timeline, when they compare what these creators were saying just before they went quiet, a different picture emerges. They were all asking similar questions about institutional trading practices, about coordinated market movements, about who benefits when retail investors lose, about the mechanics behind sudden market crashes that seem too organized to be natural. And then, silence. Consider 3 cases from 2024 alone. In March, a channel with 400,000 subscribers covering options trading patterns went dark. The creator had posted an analysis showing unusual put option activity by major banks days before a significant market drop. The video gained traction quickly. Within 72 hours, the channel received multiple strikes for financial misinformation. Appeal denied, channel removed. In July, another analyst documenting Federal Reserve policy decisions and their correlation with institutional profit patterns faced a different problem. His content was not removed, it simply stopped reaching viewers. His average view count dropped from 50,000 per video to fewer than 3,000. Same quality, same topics, different algorithmic treatment. He posted a video questioning why. That video reached 800 people. He has not posted since. In October, a former hedge fund manager turned educator began explaining how large institutions use retail investor behavior to their advantage. Her breakdown of payment for order flow and how brokerages profit from retail losses was detailed and data-driven. The video went viral, 2 million views in 4 days. Then it was age-restricted, then shadow banned. Then her entire channel was demonetized for promoting financial schemes. She had promoted nothing. She had explained existing mechanisms. These are not isolated incidents. They form a pattern that accelerates when content specifically criticizes major financial institutions by name, when analysis includes actual trading data showing institutional positioning before market events, when creators connect dots between policy decisions and institutional profits. The response is never direct. No one sends a letter saying, "Stop criticizing JP Morgan." No official notice arrives saying, "Your analysis of Goldman Sachs is prohibited." Instead, the mechanisms are subtle. Algorithmic suppression that makes content invisible. Bot networks flooding comment sections to dilute legitimate discussion. Mass reporting campaigns that trigger automated platform responses. Terms of service violations cited without clear explanation. Appeals, processes that lead nowhere. And here is what makes this particularly concerning for anyone making business decisions based on market information. The platforms themselves have financial relationships with the very institutions being criticized. Major banks advertise on these platforms. They hold equity stakes in parent companies. They provide financial services to platform executives. They lobby regulators who oversee both banking and technology sectors. This creates a conflict of interest that most viewers never consider. When someone posts a video praising a major financial institution's investment strategy, it faces no algorithmic resistance. When someone explains how that same institution might be positioned to profit from retail investor losses, the content becomes potentially harmful financial advice. The difference is not accuracy. The difference is whose interests are served. In 2023, platform policy updates across multiple major sites introduced new restrictions on financial content. The stated reason was protecting users from scams and misinformation. The practical effect was requiring creators to avoid specific types of institutional criticism or face content restrictions. Language about coordinated trading became flagged. Analysis of institutional short positions triggered reviews. Discussions of market manipulation were labeled potentially harmful. Meanwhile, content promoting specific stocks, cryptocurrency projects, and investment platforms continued with minimal restriction, as long as it did not directly challenge institutional narratives. This is not about protecting viewers. This is about controlling what viewers are allowed to see. And for business professionals and entrepreneurs who rely on understanding real market dynamics, who need accurate information to make capital allocation decisions, who cannot afford to operate on incomplete or manipulated information, this pattern represents a fundamental shift in information access, one that is accelerating, one that is becoming harder to ignore, and one that raises a critical question. If independent analysis of institutional behavior is being systematically restricted, what are they preparing for that they do not want analyzed publicly? February 2nd, 2025. A video went live. The title was direct. The content was specific. It presented publicly available data about JP Morgan's short positions during a recent market decline. It showed timestamps. It included exchange-reported figures. It connected institutional positioning with market movement patterns that retail investors had experienced as sudden, unexpected losses. Nothing in the video was speculative. Everything was documented. Within 6 hours, something unusual began happening. The comment section started filling at an abnormal rate, not with typical viewer responses, but with a different kind of activity entirely. Accounts that had never interacted with the channel before, profiles with generic names, user histories showing identical commenting patterns across multiple financial channels. They were not discussing the analysis. They were disrupting it. Some comments aggressively defended JP Morgan's trading practices, using language that seemed copy-pasted from corporate communications. Others introduced unrelated topics, cryptocurrency scams, political arguments, investment opportunities that had nothing to do with the video content. Several accounts posted long paragraphs of technical-sounding financial jargon that, upon closer examination, meant nothing at all. The purpose was not to argue. The purpose was to bury. Real viewer comments, questions about the data presented, discussions about similar patterns people had noticed, all of it pushed down by waves of artificial engagement designed to make the comment section unreadable. This was not random spam. Random spam promotes something. Random spam tries to steal clicks or sell products. Random spam is obvious and chaotic. This was organized. This was strategic narrative management. And it was just the beginning. By hour 12, another pattern emerged. Replies began appearing under the video, not in the main comment section, but as responses to the channel's pinned comment. These replies used the channel owner's name. They included external links. They promised exclusive trading signals and insider information. Classic impersonation scams. Except the volume was unusual. Typically, a channel might see 1 or 2 impersonation attempts per week. This video was generating 15 to 20 per hour, all using similar profile pictures, all following identical templates, all timed to appear shortly after real viewers left genuine comments. The effect was immediate confusion. New viewers could not tell which comments were real. Regular subscribers started warning others not to click suspicious links. The discussion shifted from the video's actual content, institutional trading patterns that cost retail investors billions, to warnings about scam comments. The analysis was being buried under manufactured chaos. But here is where the pattern becomes truly revealing. This exact sequence had happened before, not to this channel alone. In November 2024, an analyst posted detailed research about unusual options activity by major banks before a market correction. Within 24 hours, his comment section experienced identical bot flooding, same templates, same defensive narratives, same impersonation wave. In January 2025, a financial educator broke down how institutional investors use after-hours trading to their advantage. Her video showed real trade data, real timestamps, real profit extraction from retail positions. The comment section response was identical to what happened in November. Now in February, the same pattern was repeating. Different channels, different creators, same institutions being analyzed, same response. This is not coincidence. Coincidence does not follow templates. Coincidence does not scale identically across separate incidents. Coincidence does not activate within hours of specific content going live. This is coordination. And coordination requires resources. It requires monitoring systems that track when certain topics are discussed. It requires bot networks ready to deploy on command. It requires coordination between multiple accounts to create the appearance of organic disagreement. It requires understanding platform algorithms well enough to know exactly how to dilute content visibility. Individual trolls do not have these resources. Angry viewers do not organize at this scale. But institutions protecting billion-dollar positions, they have motive, they have means, they have history. JP Morgan alone has paid over $30 billion in fines and settlements since 2000 for various violations, including market manipulation, misleading investors, and rigging foreign exchange markets. This is public record. These are legal settlements. This is documented institutional behavior. An institution with that history, with trading positions worth hundreds of billions, with profit models dependent on information asymmetry between institutional and retail investors. That institution has every reason to care what independent analysts say about their trading patterns. And in 2025, they have tools to respond that did not exist a decade ago. They do not need to send legal threats. They do not need to contact platforms directly. They simply need to make independent analysis invisible under waves of artificial engagement. They need to make real discussion impossible to find. They need to ensure that when retail investors search for information about institutional trading patterns, all they find is chaos, confusion, and comments warning them to stay away. The JP Morgan video is still live. The data it presents is still accurate. The patterns it documents are still happening, but most people will never see it because the comment section tells them it is not worth watching. And that is exactly the point. There's a business model most people never think about. It operates quietly, it generates billions, and it depends entirely on one thing: controlling what people believe is true. In traditional markets, information asymmetry has always existed. Large institutions have always had advantages: better data, faster execution, direct access to corporate leadership, relationships with regulators. This is not new, but something has changed in the past 5 years. The gap is not just about who has information first anymore. It is about who controls which information reaches the public at all. And that changes everything. Consider how the modern digital economy actually works. A technology platform, let's say a video hosting site, generates revenue primarily through advertising. In 2024, financial services companies spent over $18 billion on digital advertising globally. Banks, investment firms, trading platforms, insurance companies, all competing for attention in the same digital spaces where independent financial analysis appears. Now, ask a simple question. If that platform had to choose between a creator with 200,000 subscribers posting content critical of major banks and maintaining an $18 billion advertising relationship with those same banks, which would they choose? The answer is obvious, but it gets more complex. These platforms are not just advertising venues. They have become infrastructure, information infrastructure, the primary way millions of people learn about markets, economy, and financial decisions. And infrastructure can be controlled. In 2023, 3 major platforms updated their financial content policies within the same 2-month period. The updates were framed as protecting users from scams and misinformation, reasonable on the surface, but the actual implementation revealed something else. Content discussing specific institutional trading practices was flagged for review. Analysis showing how payment for order flow benefits, brokerages at retail expense faced restrictions. Explanations of how major banks positioned themselves before policy announcements were labeled potentially misleading. Meanwhile, promotional content for trading apps, cryptocurrency platforms, and investment newsletters continued unrestricted, as long as those businesses paid for advertising or partnership arrangements. The pattern is clear. Criticism of financial institutions gets restricted under the guise of user protection. Promotion of financial products continues freely as long as revenue flows to the platform. This is not moderation. This is selective enforcement based on business relationships. And the economics make perfect sense for the platforms. An independent analyst might generate a few $1,000s in advertising revenue per month. A major financial institution might spend millions. From a pure business perspective, protecting institutional relationships while restricting independent voices is rational profit maximization. But for everyone trying to understand real market dynamics, for entrepreneurs making capital allocation decisions, for business owners trying to understand economic conditions, for anyone whose livelihood depends on accurate information, this creates a dangerous environment because markets do not function efficiently when information flow is controlled by the same institutions being analyzed. History shows what happens when financial information becomes managed rather than reported. In 2008, major media outlets were still promoting mortgage-backed securities when independent analysts were warning about systemic risk. Those warnings were dismissed as pessimistic, alarmist, not serious analysis. The institutions being criticized had advertising relationships with the outlets doing the dismissing. When the crisis hit, it was not the institutional voices who had warned anyone. It was the independent analysts who had been marginalized. The same pattern played out in 2020 during initial market dislocations. Independent voices identified unusual institutional repositioning. Mainstream financial media called it conspiracy theory. 3 weeks later, those same repositioning patterns were confirmed through regulatory filings. By then, retail investors had already absorbed losses. Institutions had already secured profits. Information asymmetry had done exactly what it was designed to do. Now, in 2025, the mechanisms of control have simply become more sophisticated. Instead of dismissing independent analysis through traditional media, platforms make it algorithmically invisible. Instead of arguing against inconvenient data, bot networks bury it under manufactured confusion. Instead of directly censoring criticism, terms of service violations make it disappear without explanation. And here is what makes this particularly dangerous for business decision makers. You cannot protect against risks you're not allowed to see clearly. When independent analysis of institutional behavior gets systematically restricted, when pattern recognition about coordinated market movements becomes flagged content, when explaining how major players position themselves before events is labeled misinformation, the people harmed are not the institutions. They already have the information. They already see the full picture. They already know what is coming. The people harmed are everyone else. The entrepreneurs who need to understand credit markets before expanding operations. The business owners who need to recognize when equity valuations are disconnected from fundamentals. The professionals who need to understand how policy decisions will impact their industries before those impacts arrive. All of them depend on information, and all of them are operating in an environment where that information is increasingly controlled by the very entities whose actions they need to understand. This is not a sustainable model. Markets require information flow to function efficiently. When information becomes a managed commodity rather than a distributed resource, when platforms choose institutional revenue over analytical accuracy, when criticism is treated as more dangerous than the behaviors being criticized, distortions accumulate, risks build unseen, and when the inevitable correction comes, those who controlled the information will already be positioned. Those who depended on that information will discover too late what they were not allowed to see clearly. That is not speculation. That is the documented pattern from every major financial disruption of the past 20 years. And in 2025, the infrastructure for information control is more sophisticated than ever, which raises one final question for this section. If institutions are investing this heavily in controlling financial narratives, what are they preparing for that requires this level of information management? The question is not whether independent financial analysis will face continued restrictions. The pattern is already established. The question is, what serious decision makers do with that understanding? Because complaining about platform bias changes nothing. Hoping for fair algorithmic treatment is not strategy. Waiting for regulatory intervention is betting on something that may never come. What matters now is adaptation, not emotional reaction, but calculated adjustment to a changed information environment. And that starts with recognizing a fundamental shift that most people have not fully processed yet. Platform dependency is now a strategic vulnerability. For years, digital platforms seemed like neutral distribution channels. Post content, reach audience, build following. Simple and predictable. That era is ending. Platforms are not neutral infrastructure. They are businesses with revenue models that increasingly conflict with independent analysis of their major clients. Treating them as reliable information channels is the equivalent of trusting a company's public relations department for objective analysis of that company's problems. It does not work. So the first strategic adjustment is obvious. Diversify information sources beyond platform-dependent content. This means direct communication channels that cannot be algorithmically suppressed. Email lists, RSS feeds, independent websites, platforms specifically designed for financial discussion without advertising conflicts. Communication methods that existed before algorithmic curation and will continue functioning regardless of platform policy changes. For business professionals, this is not about following specific creators. This is about ensuring access to analytical perspectives that might contradict institutional narratives. Because the value is not in being told what to think. The value is in seeing multiple analytical frameworks, including ones that major institutions would prefer, remain invisible, and making independent judgments based on complete information rather than curated selections. The second adjustment requires developing pattern recognition skills that most people never build. How to identify when information flow is being artificially managed. The signs are consistent. When legitimate questions about institutional behavior generate immediate defensive responses rather than data-driven discussion, that is management. When comment sections on financial analysis fill with unrelated chaos instead of focused debate, that is management. When content critical of specific institutions faces technical issues or restrictions, while promotional content for those same institutions faces none, that is management. When multiple independent analysts covering the same institutional pattern all experience similar platform difficulties within narrow timeframes, that is coordination. Learning to recognize these patterns is not paranoia. It is information literacy in an environment where narrative control has become industrialized. And for anyone making capital allocation decisions, hiring decisions, expansion decisions, partnership decisions based on economic conditions, understanding when narratives are being managed directly impacts decision quality. The third strategic adjustment is perhaps most important: building contingency plans for information disruption. What happens when a trusted analytical source disappears overnight? What happens when platform policy changes eliminate entire categories of financial discussion? What happens when algorithmic changes make certain types of economic analysis effectively invisible? Most people have no plan. They assume continuity. They assume access will remain stable. They assume the information environment of today will exist tomorrow. That assumption is dangerous. The professionals who navigate the next 5 years successfully will be those who prepare for information access to become more restricted, not less, who build multiple redundant sources, who develop direct relationships with analysts rather than depending on platform intermediaries, who treat information access as critical infrastructure requiring the same contingency planning as supply chains or payment systems. Because here is what the documented patterns reveal. Institutions are not investing in information control because everything is stable. They are investing in information control because they anticipate conditions that require managing public understanding. When banks increase spending on reputation management and digital narrative control, when platforms implement new restrictions on financial criticism during periods of institutional profit concentration, when independent analysts face coordinated suppression after documenting specific institutional trading patterns. These are not random events, these are preparations. And the professionals who recognize preparation when they see it are the ones who ask the right question. Not why is this happening to content creators, but what are institutions preparing for that requires this level of information management? That question does not have a certain answer yet, but the pattern suggests possibilities worth considering. Increased market volatility that benefits institutional positioning while harming retail participants. Policy changes that advantage major financial players while creating challenges for smaller market participants. Economic conditions that require managing public perception to prevent panic or mass repositioning. Regulatory capture reaching levels where institutional criticism becomes treated as systemic risk rather than accountability. Any of these scenarios, or combinations of them, would explain why controlling independent financial analysis has become a priority. And regardless of which scenario unfolds, the professionals who prepared for restricted information access will navigate better than those who assumed continuity. So the strategic framework is straightforward. First, diversify information access beyond platform-dependent sources immediately. Second, develop skills to recognize when narratives are being actively managed. Third, build contingency plans for information disruption as critical infrastructure planning. Fourth, understand that institutional investment in information control signals anticipated conditions requiring that control. Fifth, position decision-making processes to function with incomplete or managed information rather than depending on transparent information flow. This is not pessimism. This is pattern recognition applied to strategic planning. The business landscape ahead will favor those who see clearly over those who depend on being shown what institutions want them to see. It will favor those who prepared for information restriction over those who assumed access would remain open. It will favor those who built resilient analytical frameworks over those who depended on platforms that prioritize revenue relationships over analytical accuracy. And whether this specific analysis remains accessible or not, whether this channel continues or disappears like others before it, the patterns documented here will continue. Because they are not about individual creators. They are about structural conflicts between information access and institutional interests. Those conflicts are not resolving, they are intensifying. And the professionals who recognize that reality now will be positioned differently than those who realize it later, after their information sources have already been restricted, after their analytical frameworks have already been disrupted, after the conditions institutions were preparing for have already arrived. The choice is simple: prepare for emerging realities, or discover them when preparation is no longer possible. Everything documented here suggests which choice serious decision makers should make. The only question remaining is whether they make it in time.